Hello YouTube, it's BirdOPray5 again. As you've all heard by now, Patrick Stewart is going to return as Jean-Luc Picard in an upcoming new Trek series for CBS All Access. Expectedly, the internet seems split over the news. You have some people who think this is great news, and some people, more like myself, who are a bit concerned. We tend to be the people who do not like Star Trek Discovery and just don't have a lot of faith that the powers that be at CBS know what they're doing. As Doomcock put it in a recent Midnight's Edge After Dark live chat, there can be no peace as long as STD lives. Trekkies, of course, will easily remember the same promise being made by the Klingon ambassador to the Federation president in Star Trek IV. There shall be no peace as long as Kirk lives. While I also despise STD with a passion, I don't think it is practical CBS will ever issue a formal apology for STD and pull all the episodes from streaming and destroy the digital files and any original film of the show. But it would suffice for me if they simply admit STD was a reboot that simply doesn't take place in the same prime timeline as the prior shows. It isn't the JJ verse, and it isn't the Prime universe. It's simply a different timeline altogether and merely inspired by prior tracks, which is true. To me, it is without a doubt proven STD can't be in the Prime universe. There are dozens of things that simply can't be explained away, even if the Discovery was some kind of ultra-secret Section 31 ship, even if it has to erase itself from the timeline as some ultimate act of heroism before the series ends. The problems are bigger than the ship. For example, the Klingons. Besides looking nothing like real Klingons, and prior shows have already established what Klingons could look like at the STD timeline. And I'm sorry if the creators didn't want to be bound by what was already established, but if they didn't want to be bound, they shouldn't have picked a time between two established series. They knew what they were getting into. Unlike STD, this Picard track will take place 20 years after the last Prime universe movie or series, so they will have less to worry about, but they still could go off the rails. For example, if they use the same Klingons as in STD. Even as I was getting this video together, rumors were being reported by Doomcock, Overlord DVD channel, that he had two confirmed sources that the new Trek series starring Patrick Stewart would be taking place in what we typically call the JJ verse, and that Star Trek Discovery would also be officially moved there, somehow. Doomcock considered this the death of original Star Trek. And I suppose in a way it might be, if true. But it would mean the original Star Trek could go back to resting in peace, instead of having its corpse vandalized by the canon-destroying nature of STD. I call STD anti-Trek. When matter and antimatter come together, you get an explosion of pure energy. To me, anytime Star Trek and anti-Trek, aka STD, come together, you get a pile of pure, well, you see where I'm going. I wonder if this is the origin of Anti-Tracker's avatar. I suppose time will tell. For the time being, I'm going to put rumors aside and assume the Picard project is in the Prime universe. Patrick Stewart said himself the show took place 20 years after the events of Nemesis, and that only makes sense if it takes place in the Prime timeline. Now remember, by the end of Nemesis, the Enterprise E crew was mostly gone, though somehow Worf was back, for a reason never mentioned on screen. Prior to Nemesis, Worf was supposed to be the Federation ambassador to Kronos, and be hanging out with his pal Martok, who took over as Chancellor at the end of Deep Space Nine. Anyway, if I was charged with making the new Picard series, the most logical place to start would be to look back at the best, most fan-loved, and highly rated TNG episodes and see if there's anything to build off of. Without consulting any online sources, I can think of my own favorites, at least the favorites where Picard plays a major role. My all-time favorite episode of TNG is Parallels, where Worf keeps switching between realities, and Picard is barely in that episode. Obviously, the first thing most fans will say is Best of Both Worlds, with the Borg invasion. Chain of Command, where Picard is tortured by Cardassians. Yesterday's Enterprise, where the Enterprise C comes through a rift in space, and the timeline changes to a Federation Klingon war. And only by sending the Enterprise C back to certain death can the timeline be restored. And there are a few more, but there are major problems with all these episodes so far. Patrick Stewart said he wanted to bring the good, the positive, the optimistic future from TNG back. Indeed, that seems central to him agreeing to do the show. So shows about Borg invasions, torture, and war, which fans remember fondly, are just wastes of time in this exercise. So let's limit to the great episodes that didn't focus on war, genocide, subterfuge, and the like. Again, offhand, I can think of The Inner Light, where Picard gets zapped by an alien probe and lives an entire second lifetime in just a few minutes, and is forever changed by the experience. And Stewart did say, this very well may be a changed Picard. Inner Light was a good 60-minute episode. The story concluded. Could it be expanded? I suppose, but not in a way that would showcase the positive image of the future. Just for fun, though, maybe Picard has begun obsessing over his past life and finds a way to travel back to the real planet Catan, the one that sent the probe, 1,000 years before, and try to save the people, but he ultimately finds them to be as stubborn as he remembers. And it turns out it was his idea to send the probe all along. It wasn't looking for a compatible humanoid species. It was looking for him specifically. And his real life does end with his Katani wife and family shortly after the launch of the probe. That's maybe a 2-part episode, but hardly a series. Next on our list would be the episode where Picard defends Data's quote-unquote human rights, and he wins an official finding of being sentient and not the property of Starfleet, the measure of a man. This one is interesting because throughout the final season of Voyager, and to a lesser extent TNG as well, the idea of sentient holograms was being debated. Voyager set up the possibility of a hologram uprising, as unhappy, seemingly sentient holograms were being used as slave labor. We know Picard was steadfastly against creating artificial sentient beings to be slaves, and I assume most people would be as well. While 20 years post-Nemesis might be the right time for the always feared robot uprising, I'm not sure what positive future that would portray. However, it might have legs. Picard as a lawyer, fighting for the rights of holograms and other artificial life forms. Picard a central figure in a new civil rights movement. But it might backfire, as making light of more serious issues we see today. So, we'll keep looking. There are the Q episodes, but I think we're all tired of humanity on trial. While I enjoyed Q, and have an idea how he might play a part I bring up later, it will be brief. I don't think there is much to explore as Stewart wanted with Q. At this point, I'm starting to wonder where all the episodes that show the positive vision of humanity that TNG portrayed to us, so I started checking online for the highest rated shows I may have missed. Looking over IMDb's highest rated TNG episodes, we already covered the top 2. Third is the episode where Data creates a child. Data has since died, leaving his less sophisticated brother B4 in his place. It is quite possible Picard took a special interest in B4 and has been mentoring him for 20 years. But the reality is I just don't think Brent Spiner would nor could pull off the character any longer. So I don't see that plot line going anywhere. The 4th highest rated episode is Sarek? Really? Who's rating these? Oh, my fault. I need to sort this by IMDb rating. The Offspring, Data's kid, still ranks high. It's not 3rd. Okay, so correctly sorted. The first episode I didn't already cover is number 6. Cause and Effect. A basic time loop episode. No future story here. Some Q episodes, then Chain of Command, as I mentioned before. Too dark. Number 10 is my favorite, Parallels. Honestly, I'm surprised this ranked so high. I didn't think many people agreed with me. Number 11. How could I forget this one? Darmok. As in Darmok and Jalad at Tanagra. And Shaka, When the Walls Fell. This was a great episode, and it deserves to be in the top 10. We never saw the Temerians again, so it would get fans excited to see them back, but I don't see building a series off the concept. Let's see what else is on the list. More Borg, the Junior Officers episode, the series finale, which gave us one possible timeline of future Picard, though clearly not the one we'll see in the upcoming show. Next is a Q episode, then Relics. I loved Relics. Scotty was back, and they had found an entire Dyson sphere to explore. The interior of that sphere would have been the equivalent of many thousands of Earths. They should still be exploring it. Unfortunately, James Doohan has since passed, but I wouldn't mind knowing what, if anything, Starfleet did with that sphere. Ship in a Bottle, a hologram episode I touched on, the Pegasus, the ship with the Federation cloaking device, very Section 31-ish, not the future Stewart wants to show. Then there's Timescape, the episode where bubbles of time affect the surprisingly spacious shuttlecraft Picard, Data, Troy, and Geordi are on, and Picard's fingernails grow like they hadn't been cut in a year when he accidentally puts his hand in a time bubble. And it hurts, too. Well, nothing there. back to the list. Romulan defector, Klingons, the drumhead, where Picard is on trial of sorts, and he has to use the retired admiral's father's words to defend himself, causing her to melt down and the proceedings to finally end. Good episode, but no real story to build on. Okay, checking a few more stories on this list. Time's Arrow, they go back in time and meet Mark Twain. Unification, the Spock episode. Okay, so I skipped ahead through this list all the way through the top 40 rated TNG episodes. And the only one worth mentioning, even having a possible part to play in the future Picard series, is number 39. The episode simply called Family. And it's Picard at home in France, on the family vineyard, after he was deborged following Best of Both Worlds. We see his brother, his beloved nephew Rene. Picard briefly considers a life outside Starfleet. Okay, well, I skipped ahead. I looked through 60 of the top rated episodes, and I'm starting to think there's nothing here. Sure, TNG was a great series, and we have many great episodes, but most of the best episodes don't show our bright future, and the ones that do don't leave much to build on. But why limit ourselves to TNG episodes? There were movies. In fact, the very first TNG movie, Star Trek Generations, Picard winds up in the Nexus, where we see for the first time what he really wanted the most out of life. And it wasn't a starship, it wasn't archaeology, and it wasn't a lifetime supply of hot Earl Grey tea. It was a family. And remember, Picard previously learned, in Generations, his beloved nephew and last heir to the Picard name had tragically died, by fire no less. So let us get back to Nemesis. Even today, men of Captain Picard's age, or even Patrick Stewart's, can and have fathered children, though usually with much younger women. No doubt by the year 2379, the year given for the events of Nemesis, both older men and women have extended their breeding years considerably. There was also undeniable chemistry between Captain Picard and Dr. Crusher throughout the final season of TNG. The series finale indeed showed they had even married. And in the movies, including Nemesis, it's clear they're more than colleagues. When was the last time Troy sat on the captain's desk? So we all know there's more going on here than made the movie. It may be a very different individual, may not be the Jean-Luc you remember. These were the words of Patrick Stewart describing Picard in the future series. And if the magic happened during or soon after Nemesis, the new series could see Picard, the father of a 20-year-old, probably a daughter, political realities being what they are. Maybe two daughters, a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old. One who was going to the academy and one who was a civilian. That one can show us the luxuries future Earth has to share, instead of always being on the brink of war or in danger that comes with being stationed on a starship. I picture the opening scene of the first episode, where Q drops in on Old Man Picard in his family home after not having seen him for decades. Q says something like, "And forgive me because I don't do impressions." well. I don't do impressions well, so don't expect a lot. Q drops in and says something like, "A family man, Jean-Luc? Who would have thunk it?" And Picard, mildly annoyed, replies, "Yes, the first one was a surprise. But it was the best thing that ever happened in my life. And we figured if we're going to have one, might as well have two." Q looks at him with a smirk. "A surprise?" he asks. Jean-Luc begins to talk, but Q stops him and says, "I would describe her more as a gift." And Picard says, "All children could be thought of as gifts." I don't even know where that accent is going. And Q says, "Perhaps some are more gift than others." It's been 30 years. Can we stop with the riddles, Q? Let's just say I was closer than you thought that night. And Q goes on to give details that Picard instantly remembers the night describing his oldest daughter's conception. Maybe something about a passing storm blowing open the windows, something they never shared with anyone else. "You were watching? Really, Q? That is low even for you." "I did more than watch. Did you ever wonder how Beverly ended up pregnant, even with all those precautions you humans take?" "Well, no precaution is perfect," says Picard. "Au contraire," Q says. "It would have been, if not for me." "You caused Beverly's pregnancy?" says a stunned Picard. "You had no right." And again Q stops him. "That's a funny way of saying thank you, Jean-Luc. You just said it was the best thing that ever happened to you. But if you want me to undo it..." And Q lifts his hand, ready to snap his fingers. "No!" yells Picard. "Oh, don't worry, Jean-Luc. I knew you always wanted a family. And I knew Beverly always wanted a daughter. But you were both too scared to tell each other, because you were afraid it would drive the other away. In fact, you two didn't even admit it was exactly what you wanted, until the first hologram of the embryo. Even at 6 weeks, she looked a lot like you. I mean, aside from the tail. Blah." Picard is sitting stunned in silence, at a loss for words. That's okay. Just listen. I can't stay long. Well, I could, but that's the problem with being omnipotent. It's so hard to relate to more limited species. What I'm telling you, Jean-Luc, is the Q are moving on to new things. You won't see us around for a while." "How long is a while?" asks Picard. "Oh, an eon, maybe 2. "So this is goodbye?" asks Picard. "No, it is simply goodbye for now." "Where are you going?" asks Picard. Q says, "I'm really not supposed to talk about it, but I trust you, Jean-Luc. Are you aware of what your Starfleet calls the mirror universe?" And Picard says, "Yes, we were all briefed as captains. Another reality where people, very similar to our own, but with a completely different history. There was no federation. Humans went to the stars for conquest, but then were enslaved." To which Q says, "Your mirror universe, in fact, had an identical start to this universe. The same Big Bang, the same galaxies forming in the same clusters, the same stars heating the same oceans, the same organic life taking hold. Everything exactly the same except one thing." Picard asks, "What one thing?" To which Q says, "There's no Q. Not one Q in the entire universe. so we have a lot of work to do. Farewell for now, my friend. And Picard stands up, perhaps doing his trademark Picard maneuver, and asks, "How can I ever thank you?" To which Q answers, "No need, my friend. After all, you did let me name her." Name her? We picked her name. Well, middle name. Then Q does his finger snap and disappears. Moments later, a screen on the wall behind him starts chirping. Incoming message from Lily Q Picard. Roll opening credits. I think we'll cut this here for now. I have no idea how long it is, but I can tell it's already longer than I thought it would be. If there's demand, I'll revisit my ideas on how this new Picard series might go. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts so far. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and/or subscribe. If you're really bored, check out my general discussion off-topic web forum at juot.net. And finally, if you like the Futurama style graphics, check out ACIDesigns. Their Twitter and website are in the video description. Good night, and Qapla'.